So today I want to go over an incredibly well-rounded Druid build for Season 2 of Diablo 4, and this is going to be a Tornado Werewolf build. Now the one big downside with this build is that you need Tempest Roar for the build to actually work, but once you get this helmet, a bunch of different builds open up, and the main reason you need this is because your base Storm skills are now also Werewolf skills, meaning we get a ton of additional scaling by being able to continuously use our Tornado while in Werewolf, also being able to add in Grizzly Rage and turn that into a Werewolf skill as well. And Tempest Roar also has a lucky hit of Storm skills have up to a 25% chance to grant Force Spirit. This is actually useful in this version of this build, specifically with Season 2, because you can get so much attack speed. You can actually run out of Spirit in this build even while in Grizzly Rage, which is something that did not happen previously. So starting off, we have our skill tree with our generator, which is Wind Shear. We do actually have to use this sometimes. It's primarily once we get into Grizzly Rage, we need to build up our Spirit a little bit. So this is actually used more often than it used to be in this build, and I want a range generator instead of a melee one, just because once you're doing harder content, you want to be kiting enemies more. Then upgrade 1 has a chance to make enemies become vulnerable just to get lower in the tree. Then 5 into Tornado, our main damage dealer. Upgrade 1 has a chance to spawn an additional Tornado, and upgrade 2, Tornadoes can now make enemies vulnerable. Then we're going down, taking the Cyclone Armor, which gives you non-physical damage reduction. When you activate it, it knocks enemies away. This is actually pretty good. Once you get into really high tier Nightmare dungeons, this will allow you to kite much easier by knocking all the enemies away. Then upgrade 1 slows enemies when you activate it. Upgrade 2 gives us a damage reduction every 10 seconds. Then we have Blood Howl, which is just a heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown by 1 second on a kill. Upgrade 2 gives us increased attack speed. So we're going to have this up all the time, and we want to keep the attack speed buff up as much as possible. Then we're going down 1 into Hurricane, which is just an AoE around us. It can deal some decent-ish damage. This is primarily to proc other effects. Upgrade 1 slows enemies. Upgrade 2 causes enemies to deal less damage. Then we're going down, we're taking Grizzly Rage, which is going to give us a ton of different buffs. Upgrade 1 grants us Unstoppable for 6 seconds. Upgrade 2 fortifies us for 8% of our max life per second. Then we're taking Earthern Might, which damaging enemies with an Earth skill has up to a 5% chance to both restore all of your spirit and cause all of your attacks to be guaranteed crits for 5 seconds. The chance for this to proc is increased off crits and off hitting CC'd enemies, and we're going to be using a legendary aspect that allows us to proc off of Storm skills. And this is going to add a massive amount of damage, and this is going to be one of the main things that allows us to not usually have to use any generators while in Grizzly Rage. Then we have our passives, 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses. Your core skills cost more but deal increased damage. Then 3 into Predatory Instinct, gives increased critical strike chance to close enemies, then increased movement speed while in Werewolf. Then we're going down 3 into Ancestral Fortitude, gives you plus 15 resistances to all your resistances. Then Vigilance, when you use the defensive, we get damage reduction. Then we're going down 2 into Nature's Reach. This was just the rest of the points we had, deals increased damage to distant enemies. Then we're going down 1 into Elemental Exposure, which is just another lucky hit that can apply vulnerable. 3 into Endless Tempest, so our Hurricane lasts longer. 1 into Bad Omen, which can just proc additional damage, primarily to get Electric Shock. Another lucky hit that has a chance to immobilize enemies, and if the enemy is already immobilized, we deal massively increased lightning damage to them. Now this is something I am testing out to see how well it actually works, and I think this may actually be pretty worth, more specifically once you're doing much higher tier content, because enemies are actually going to last. If you're doing content where the enemies are your level, they're probably not going to survive long enough for this to actually matter that much. You may want to move these points around. Then we're going down 3 into Neurotoxin. Poison enemies are slowed by 24%. This is mainly for kiting enemies in higher tier content. 1 into Toxic Claws. Any crits with our Werewolf skills cause an enemy to be poisoned. We don't care about the poison damage, just that they are poisoned. Then 3 into Envenom. You deal increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. Then 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal increased damage to elites. And then next up, we have our Spirit Boons. Wariness to take reduced damage from elites. We have Sight Talents to give us increased critical strike chance. Then we're taking Calamity, extend the duration of our ultimate by 25%. Then we're also taking Bolster, which you fortify for 15% of your max life when you use a defensive. Now this is actually needed for this build because the only fortify we actually have is when Grizzly Rage is active. Now I'm specifically taking Bolster because once you get into much higher tier content, you're going to be taking a lot more damage more consistently, so your fortify is going to be used up quite a bit, and Grizzly Rage itself may not give you enough to constantly keep yourself fully fortified. Now if you're doing lower tier content and you notice you don't need Bolster at all, you can take out Bolster and instead take swooping attacks for increased attack speed. Then finally we have Calm Before the Storm, another lucky hit. hit, and it just goes have a chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds, so we can be in Greasy Rage more. And next up, we have our Vampiric Powers, starting with Undying. Casting a skill heals you for 3% of your life, double this when below 50%. This is our primary sustainability, and we're gonna have some pretty crazy attack speed, so we'll get ridiculous amounts of healing. Prey on the Weak, you deal pretty massive increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Then we have Metamorphosis. When you evade, you're unstoppable for 4 seconds, and you deal damage to enemies in the path of the invade. This is very important because this is our unstoppable. We only have unstoppable for 6 seconds every time we cast a new Grizzly Rage. Grizzly Rage lasts for a long time, so we need other unstoppable. This is very good. It also just helps with general movement. Then we have Anticipation. Your ultimate skill gains 20% cooldown reduction. This mixed with our Calm Before the Storm, you should usually be able to be in Grizzly Rage almost 100% of the time. Then finally, we have Ravenous, another lucky hit, up to a 20% chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your total movement speed for 6 seconds. So at a base, without being in Werewolf, without any other movement speed buffs, I'm getting 56% increased attack speed. This will go up when we're in Werewolf and have more movement speed. We also get even more movement speed when in Grizzly Rage. So this is going to be a massive attack speed increase, and this is where one possible issue can come into with this build. Because you have so much attack speed, even when in Grizzly Rage, you can actually run out of Spirit in this build, which you couldn't before, but that also means you're just spamming out a lot more tornadoes than you would before. And if you get a singular proc of our capstone that refills our Spirit, you're fine for the entirety of that Grizzly Rage. And then next up, we have our Paragon Boards. Like on my other builds, we're primarily going to be going over the board selection and the glyph selection. This is definitely a work in progress. There's definitely some stuff I want to change up because I'm doing some testing. I also don't have all of my glyphs leveled up. So once my glyphs at least get to 15, which will give me some more resist all, there's definitely some points that are going to be changed around here. But starting off, we have the exploit glyph. Now, the primary reason you want this is to get the secondary effect. This will just massively increase our burst. We don't have a guaranteed way or a super fast way to apply vulnerable at all times. So this will just massively increase our burst because this will guarantee vulnerable. And you can get the secondary effect of the exploit glyph as a level 1 glyph on the starter board. So it's very good for that. Then we're going up, we're taking the Lust for Carnage board. Critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit. This is going to be very big for making sure we have a lot of spirit, especially on boss fights. Then we're taking the werewolf glyph, increased damage while on werewolf, damage reduction while on werewolf. Since I haven't been running werewolf builds, this glyph isn't leveled up. So this will give me a massive damage increase once I start leveling this up. Get to 15, you'll get some pretty big damage increases. Then we're going over to the left, we're taking the Heightened Malice board, which while 3 or more enemies are poisoned near you, you deal 45% increased multiplicative damage, one of the best legendary nodes in the game. But then after we get the legendary node, we're going back over, going up. Then we're taking the Thundershark board. Storm skills deal increased damage equal to 20% of your damage versus close and damage versus distant. I currently don't have a lot of this, so this isn't super useful right now. Again, once I get my glyph leveled up and I change some stuff around, this is going to make more sense as to why it's there. And then the glyph we're using is Fang and Claw, which gives a bonus to all magic nodes within range, then gives you increased damage to close enemies. And taking glyphs like this are primarily to get some good damage reduction in these areas, so damage reduction from vulnerable. And then you get pretty big stat increases by taking the dexterity or intelligence nodes within range if you need to take more of those stats to get the secondary effect of some of these rare nodes throughout the boards. Then we're going over to the left, taking Constricting Tendrils, and we're taking the Spirit glyph, massively increase critical strike damage. Then critical strikes increase the damage enemies take from you by 2% up to 12%. Then I also did go over and I put some points into these rare and magic nodes that gives a damage reduction to damage taken over time, also gives resist all. I'm currently testing this out because some of the damage over time in season 2, because elemental damage is actually very dangerous, I'm testing this out to see if this is actually useful, but it may not be, and I may end up removing these points and putting them somewhere else. Then we're going down to the Heightened Malice board, taking the glyph in here, which is Earth and Sky, another bonus to all magic nodes within range to get more stats and primarily more damage reduction against poison enemies. Then finally, we're going over to the left, we're taking the Ancestral Guidance board to get Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, you deal massively increased damage for 5 seconds. And with how this build is in season 2, this is going to be procced 100% of the time that you're actually using your tornado. And then next up, we have our gems and our legendary aspects. On your weapons, you're going to want crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies. On your gear, you want damage reduction while fortified. And on your jewelry, you want to fill out your resistances so you're 70% capped on all resistances. And gems on your jewelry is a massive buff to that if you need them. If you don't need additional resistance gems on your jewelry, just put armor on them. And then for our legendary aspects, our primary one goes on your necklace, which Grizzly Rage now shapeshifts you into a dire werewolf. You gain increased movement speed, and more importantly, you gain spirit cost reduction up to 75%. 75%. So when in Grizzly Rage, our tornadoes cost 75% less. This is how we get to spam up tornadoes. And the movement speed is actually much more important now because it'll give us increased attack speed. Then the rest of our offensive aspects can go on our rings, our gloves, or our weapons. So first we have tornadoes seek up to 3 targets. This just means your tornadoes have some amount of tracking, makes it much easier for kiting, especially in Nightmare Dungeons. Then we have critical strikes with core skills, increase your attack speed by 25%. More attack speed can spam out more tornadoes. Then your core skills do up to 40% increased damage based on your fortify. We'll have fortify all the time, so there's just a massive multiplicative damage increase. Then we have your Earthen Might Key passive also applies to your storm skills. That's the lucky hit we went over. And then finally, increase the duration of your Grizzly Rage by up to 5 seconds, and critical strikes while in Grizzly Rage increase your critical strike damage up to 200%. This used to be 1000%. This is the main reason why I think these tornado builds are actually dealing a bit less damage compared to the rest of the game than they were. Previous to Season 2, Tornado was probably the highest damaging build in the game that wasn't built off of a broken synergy. So we had a bunch of builds that got much weaker because the thing they were built off of was fixed, something that wasn't supposed to be happening. Tornado is a build that's never been like that. It's basically just been, you can spam out tons of tornadoes that constantly deal tons of damage. Nothing's broken off it, but it does deal less damage, equivalent to everything else than it was before. But I do think with the defensive changes, this build is now actually really tanky and still does pretty high damage. And then for our other aspects, we have Disobedience, gives you increased stacking armor, which is pretty needed to be able to stay alive from melee attacks. Then we have damage reduction while in Werewolf. You could also go with Might, which gives you damage reduction after using a basic skill, but we don't actually use a basic skill as much as you would think, so this just gives us damage reduction at all times. Then on our boots, while unstoppable and 4 seconds after, you gain up to 25% increased movement speed and can freely move through enemies. This is pretty massive because every time we use our evade, we're now unstoppable. So we're always going to have increased movement speed and we're basically always going to be able to move freely through enemies. This is incredibly strong for Season 2. And then finally, we have our gear stats. Now our helmet, we have Tempest Roar, so you can't change the stats on that. And your chest piece, you want all damage reduction. Damage reduction while fortified, while poisoned, while distant, from close, any damage reduction all on your chest. Your gloves, you want attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and then ranks for tornado. This is a pretty well-rolled set of gloves. Then in your legs, the same as your chest, you want all damage reduction. One of the main ones I like though is damage reduction while injured, because this damage reduction roll is so much bigger than the others, and basically everything that's going to kill you is going to deal a lot of your health very quickly. So this gives you massive damage reduction while you're at the point of actually being able to be killed. Then on your boots, you want movement speed, more damage reduction while injured, then a dodge chance roll, dodge chance against distant, against close, or just dodge chance. And then if you need another resistance roll, you can get these on your boots as well. I have fire resistance because that's one of the harder resistances to get. Then on our weapon, willpower, core skill damage, damage to close, or damage to distant. I think I would probably rather go damage to distant. And then I have critical strike damage with werewolf skills as well. I think technically damage to close and damage to range would technically be the best, but I would rather not have the damage to close on it. Then on our offhand, we have critical strike chance, cooldown reduction. You can also get lucky hit. I would rather have a lucky hit, but also damage reduction from poison or from fortified, also really good as well. Can't go wrong with more damage reduction. Then on our necklace, we have a move speed roll, a ranks to Envenom passive roll, which is very good, and then just 2 defensive rolls. I have total armor and damage reduction while fortified. You can also just go damage reduction while poisoned. Then on our rings, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, max life are the 3 main rolls. Then you can just get any other damage roll. You can get a critical strike damage, critical strike with werewolf skills, a vulnerable damage roll, any other damage roll is going to be fine. But that's the entirety of this tornado werewolf build. I think overall this build is still ridiculously strong in Season 2. I do think comparing to the rest of the game, the damage is a bit lower than it was previous to Season 2, but I do think this build is defensively stronger than it used to be. So overall, I think this is a very balanced build that will allow you to do all of the hardest content in the game. Nightmare 100 dungeons should be easy with this. You can do all the endgame bosses, and you still should be able to do Lilith pretty easily as well. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
ready yet.